Hi, I'm Patrick Markfort.
And I'm Dave Ferraro. Welcome to the Comics and More podcast. This week we are going to be talking about two graphic novels from Shigeru Mizuki. I'll be talking about Nonnonba later, and Patrick will be beginning with Onward Toward Our Noble Deaths.
Mm-hmm. So, Onward Towards Our Noble Deaths is the first book that Drawn and Quarterly has released by the manga artist Shigeru Mizuki. And a lot of people who know manga have felt that this artist being translated into English is long overdue. He's very, very well known in Japan and has gotten a lot of acclaim and accolades over his long career. He's still alive, I think, nearing 90. But a very revered creator who astonishingly has not previously been translated into English. So Drawn and Quarterly has finally brought over his work. And interestingly, they began with Onward Towards Our Noble Deaths, which is not really typical of the type of work that Shigeru Mizuki is most well known for. It is a semi-autobiographical account of his time in the military during World War II. And specifically, it deals with the theme of the Japanese Army's reverence for this ideal of these suicide attacks. And Mizuki himself was involved in such an incident where his unit was expected to essentially kill themselves in battle against the enemy. He, of course, survived. And obviously that experience really affected him. He also later lost an arm in a later battle during the war. So clearly this is a man who has lived and experienced firsthand the horrors of war. And Onward Towards Our Noble Deaths is very much an aggressive anti-war narrative. It certainly is critical of the practice of these suicide attacks, but in general, I think through and through, from the opening pages until the last chilling, horrifying image, this is an anti-war war book. It starts out sort of anecdotally, short chapters detailing the daily lives of the soldiers. And again, there's nothing glamorous or heroic about their experiences. Shigeru Mizuki's style is very cartoony. His characters usually have sort of like large, misshapen heads, and they're sort of funny-looking characters, while his backgrounds are incredibly realistically drawn. Now, that's sort of typical of almost all manga to some extent. Realistic backgrounds, often drawn by assistants, and more cartoony characters in the foreground. But I would say that Shigeru Mizuki takes that style to an extreme. His characters are particularly goofy looking, and his backgrounds are particularly photorealistic. So both of those cartooning styles are quite lovely, and I think play off nicely against one another. Yeah. Once you're used to that, it did not prove distracting as you read the book, so I quite enjoyed that style. But in any case, the book sort of starts out with, like I said, the daily lives of the soldiers, just the drudgery and the just kind of extremely unpleasant conditions that they're involved in during this campaign. And I think the first few deaths we see in the book are even accidental deaths through various mishaps and occurrences.
And there's disease and stuff that...
Yeah, so it's really about the drudgery and the day-to-day existence of these soldiers, not any kind of a glamorous, heroic story at all. And then as the narrative progresses, it becomes clear that this particular unit of soldiers is expected to participate in this hopeless campaign against the enemy, and they will be expected to essentially die for no real reason. the soldiers are not depicted as wanting to do this. They're terrified, and really under the thumb of their commanding officers. The suicide campaign, many of the soldiers survive it, and then they are left with this situation where they're seen as being very dishonorable for having survived this attack, and what happens after that is just really just brutal and shocking, but representative of the kind of attitudes, I guess, that were prevalent in regards to the Japanese Imperial Army at that time. So it's a very there's a lot of humor in it.
Yeah. There's a lot of humor. I feel like he really tries, like in those, like you said, like the beginning is kind of like these little short stories almost. There's a lot of pranks that they play on each other. Yeah,
it starts out, it kind of sneaks up on you.
Yeah.
Like right away you realize this is not a book that's glamorizing war.
Mm-hmm.
This is not the story of a heroic particular character.
Mm-hmm.
Like right away you realize this is an anti-war narrative of sorts. It's the day-to-day drudgery, and as it builds to this suicide charge to the end, it really becomes a kind of chilling, really aggressive anti-war narrative, and the final final image is just very sober, stark, chilling,
mm-hmm.
and quite powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So I enjoyed this book quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was like I say, it kind of sneaks up on you, but I thought it was really moving. It was originally published, I think, in the early 1970s.
Mm-hmm. It reads very modern, though.
It does, and I think it's one of the great war narratives told in comics form of all time. And it's great that American audiences are now able to read it and see it. The one minor gripe I would have about it was that the characters in the book, the soldiers, were sort of indistinguishable. They did not really stand out. I couldn't really keep track of
there were a lot of
individual characters, and there were a lot of characters. So that would be my only kind of gripe with it.
But I do think that Mizuki was like kind of just like humanizing this this regimen like overall. You know what I mean? Through the pranks and stuff like that. He made them seem like a likable bunch. But he didn't really make distinguishable individuals.
The characters did not distinguish themselves as much. They looked similar. There were so many of them. It was difficult to keep them straight.
He was really highlighting the camaraderie.
Yeah, that didn't really distract so much, because they're all kind of, they're soldiers, they're a unit, they're all kind of in the same situation. They're all, sort of have the same attitude about this suicide charge. And so it worked as a dramatic narrative, even without, having those distinct characters really stand out from the group. Because it really was about the group. It wasn't about, a single soldier's experience, even though this was, like, clearly informed by Shigeru Mizuki's own experiences. Like, I'm sure many of the short chapters were drawn from actual stories and anecdotes that he heard or experienced during his time in the army. So I thought this was a great book. I mean, I knew the name Shigeru Mizuki, but I like most American audiences, have just not had a chance to really read any of his stuff. So this was my first introduction to him, and I think it was a good choice by Drawn and Quarterly. Like I said, it's not the type of work that he's most known for, but I think it's a good way to introduce him to Drawn and Quarterly's audience. Kind of more mature, serious work, and also kind of cool that it's autobiographical.
Yeah, I agree. It was
great book.
Yeah, it came out last year. I think it was easily one of the best manga offerings that came out last year.
And
Drawn and Quarterly does a really good job with these too. I really like the designs of these.
Yeah, they're beautiful looking books, of course, as all of Drawn and Quarterly's stuff is. And the books look sort of similar to each other, the two volumes we have here. Yep. So they kind of go together. So you can build a nice Shigeru Mizuki library. which is worth doing. I mean, I do think he is, even just reading this first book, he clearly is kind of a master of his craft, and you know, is saying something very personal and important to him in this book. It's great book.
All right. Let's move on to his more recent work that's been published over here, and that's Nonnonba. And this one is a much lighter book, probably more toward the type of thing that he's known for. He's known for his interest in the yokai, and this one really deals with his own experiences to an extent, probably growing up with yokai and the stories that his grandmother told him.
Yeah, and yokai are
like, it's kind of a vague term. It's like, it could be like spirits, it could be like ghosts.
Yeah. It's
demons. That
yeah,
kind of thing.
Yokai are it's something of a catch-all term for various supernatural beings.
Exactly.
In Japan,
and it's almost like, you know, like we used to have this with demons too, like even like in Europe, where certain like circumstances, you know, would come about and they would kind of like give a name to it by personifying like a demon.
Yeah.
So the yokai is kind of like that. Like if like there's like something like if somebody dies like walking home or something like that, there's a demon that does something to them that makes that happen, basically. So they're like giving this.
It's drawn out of folklore and all this.
Yep.
And Shigeru Mizuki is considered yokai expert, yokai master, and the work that he is most known for deals explicitly with yokai. Like that's his thing.
And this is his experiences growing up. And he grew up in this kind of smaller village that's kind of like, it's, you know, they have to fight to survive pretty much. You know, they're struggling for food. They're struggling to make ends meet a lot. And it's his experiences with his grandmother, Nonnonba, and the story she provides for him and the general like people in the town too. A lot of people think it's silly nonsense, but he takes it very seriously, as does his grandmother. And I mean, a lot of this focuses on that, but there are other aspects of his childhood that are examined. For example, there are two girls that kind of come into his life. One through the first part of the narrative and one in the second part of the narrative. The first one is Shigusu. I don't know if I'm pronouncing these right, but it works. And she's a girl who comes to town who Nonnonba takes care of, who is dying from tuberculosis. And during this time, Mizuki is drawing these like stories, and she really like appreciates the stories that he does for her. And he does this one where he pretty much like draws out like where she's going to go after she dies, and you know, he kind of finds some peace from her death, thinking that she's going to go to these places. And during this journey, they experience a lot of yokai and stuff like that too. And then the second part of the book has a character named Miwa in it. And she's a younger girl who comes with kind of a richer family into town. And she can see yokai, allegedly, and she can kind of predict like the weather a little bit. But they have like a special bond over time, but eventually she is sold to a geisha house, I think is what it is. So there's another sad experience in his life that he's dealing with there. But meanwhile, he's dealing with like there's a childhood like kind of war that they put on where all the children engage in these like strange like warlike activities where they like throw rocks at each other, and
they're kind of organized into little kid gangs. And they have battles against they play war. They play war. But I mean, it can get kind of mean. There's like some, you know, ostracizing going on and bullying, and they take it a little too seriously at times. But mixed in with all this stuff is this folklore of the yokai, introducing us to some very strange looking creatures, especially this one like weird bearded one that pops up every once in a while. So the yokai are depicted as real in this book. So it's not just, you know, a completely factual account of, you know, him growing up and hearing stories about these yokai, but the yokai appear in the book, and it's all played as though they exist, and
yeah, kind of. I mean, some people
somewhat.
walk into rooms and they'll see somebody like talking to themselves after they'd had an experience with a yokai,
Right.
and so I mean, he leaves it kind of vague like that. But the
Yeah.
main character
But the
and
main
some of
char-
the other characters like engage with the yokai.
Yeah, and they draw the yokai are drawn into the book,
Yep.
and
Exactly. But I mean, obviously a lot of people don't believe in this stuff, so there's kind of, a mixture of characters that do believe, that don't believe. But Mizuki, interprets the yokai as sometimes kind of like fun and funny, and sometimes kind of more serious and dark, depending on kind of what's going on in Mizuki's life at that time.
Yeah.
So, but basically, I mean, this is a lot lighter than a work like Onward, Toward Our Noble Deaths, but it did seem more intimate. Their characters are more developed in this one.
Yeah.
And yeah, I generally enjoyed it overall. The characters, I don't know if this came earlier than Onward, Toward Our Noble Deaths when they were
I'm not
published.
sure.
But I felt like the art was was just more generally like cartoony in Nonnonba. And Onward, Toward Our Noble Deaths, I mean, obviously the more realistic backgrounds and stuff, but I feel like even the characters in that were drawn a little more clearly. And in Nonnonba, they were just a little more vague, I guess. And like this is kind of like the expression that he has on his face the entire time. So you kind of knew who he was throughout the entire thing, but it was kind of like it was almost like set like that a little bit. So I mean, that kind of bugged me a little bit, just that his mouth was always turned up. But I mean, it was a stylistic choice. But anyways,
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't really notice that about the artwork. I thought it looked.
I mean,
great.
it was fantastic overall. I mean, it's definitely not as like the backgrounds like aren't as detailed as like Onward, Toward Our Noble
Yeah,
Deaths
you're
either.
right. Yeah,
They're more
I think
cartoony.
the arts the difference in the art style is just has to do with the
A
tone,
choice,
the
yeah.
tone of the narrative. You know,
Yeah.
this is a much more serious. There's no supernatural or
Yeah.
anything in this. This is an adult. Well, I don't think there's no children in this book. It's just the soldiers. Whereas this is a narrative, a more lighthearted narrative, albeit with some pretty serious issues, especially towards the end.
But a lot of it's told through humor.
And it's told through the perspective of a child.
Yeah.
So I think the subtle differences in the style of art is probably attributable to that.
Yeah.
But this was a great book too.
Yeah.
I really I think it's cool that between these two volumes you have kind of a biography of Shigeru Mizuki. You know, like Nonnonba is kind of the origins of his interest in the yokai and his first steps towards becoming a cartoonist.
And a little bit of like a coming of age, like he
Very
deals with
much
these
so.
issues.
Very much so. Yeah, coming of age story. So this is like his childhood narrative, and Onward Towards the Noble Deaths, you get a very significant portion of his young adult life. So between these two volumes, you sort of get a nice autobiography of this, comic book artist. So I thought that was pretty cool. But Nonnonba is terrific. It's a really unique kind of narrative. I was reminded somewhat of what's the name of Tatsumi's autobiography?
Oh, Fallen Words?
No,
Or-
his autobiography that he did.
Drifting Life.
Drifting Life. Just in that was another manga, format biography of a creator. Although that one was more about the manga industry and him working as a professional. But I don't know. I guess I like these cartoonist biographies in comics form. I think it's kind of a cool like subgenre. And this one was just really entertaining. I mean, the yokai are really cool and interesting, so all the stories about them and the depictions of them in the book were really cool. I liked how it was played straight as though the yokai existed and they appeared in the book. I kind of feel like he kind of treated that aspect in the way that, like, say, like Charles Schultz in Peanuts. Like, is Snoopy really doing these things? Like, is Snoopy really dressing up like, a World War I flying ace and fighting the Red Baron? Is he actually fighting the Red Baron? Like, what level of reality are we at here? And it kind of doesn't matter because since it's from the perspective of a young child, you kind of live in that imaginative world all of the time. So I don't think Shigeru Mizuki... I I think Shigeru Mizuki probably does believe in yokai.
I think so.
But I don't think he actually thinks that he had the experiences that are depicted in this book with the yokai. But as a child, I think that stuff felt very real and very present and very much a part of his world. So I think that was a really appropriate way to depict it in this book. So I really enjoyed that. So it was a yokai story, but it was also a story about stories about the yokai. You know what I mean? And it all just worked. It worked really well. And I liked the subplot with the kid gangs, and there's the whole thing where the Shigeru Mizuki stand-in was ostracized from the kid gang at one point. He starts hanging out with the girl more, and then he is the person who ostracizes him sort of starts to be abusive, and the other kids want him to come back and kind of take over as the new boy general, because they have very strict rankings and all this. I mean, it's very, these boys obviously clearly fetishize and idolize the military, and they love playing at the military. But by the end of the narrative, the Shigeru Mizuki character does become the new boy general, but he makes the decision to absolve the hierarchy of ranks and become a group of pacifists for his boy gang, which I'd be curious to know if that actually happened. But it provided a really cool ending for this narrative, and it pointed towards the kinds of anti-war attitudes that Mizuki would explicitly explore in Onward Towards Our Noble Deaths. So it's a bit of the origins of his anti-war attitude as well in this book. So it's just really great how they tied all that in. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, it was just really fantastic. And the structure is sort of similar to Onward Towards Our Noble Deaths in that it's very anecdotal, but as you go along, it does kind of build up to this climax with him deciding to turn the gang of boys into pacifists, as well as his young friend being sold into a geisha house, which is a very grim subject for this book. But yeah, it was all depicted, in a very sensitive, appropriate way, and the characters find some level of comfort in each other and their belief in the supernatural. So another great book. So it's Adriana Corley's decision in the order to release Mizuki's stuff is interesting. So they start out with a totally realistic narrative, which their audience is probably more comfortable with, then the autobiography, which deals with the theme of the yokai, and then of course next they're going to be doing Gigigi no Kitaro, which is the work that Shigeru Mizuki is hugely famous for in Japan. This thing is a hit. It is well known in Japan. People love this children's series about yokai. So Adriana Corley is going to be bringing that over next. So I feel like they've kind of primed the pump with these two works. And I enjoyed these a lot. I absolutely cannot wait to read Gigigi no Kitaro. So
yeah, I hadn't heard that they were going to be doing that, so that is exciting.
Yep. And it's like I say, it's well known in Japan. Mizuki's a real kind of celebrity. There's a reality show about him and his wife. So this is long overdue to have his stuff translated. But these were great books, and I think he's clearly in the hierarchy of great manga creators. So highest possible recommendation for both. I don't know. Did you prefer one to the other?
No, I mean, I like them both for different reasons.
Yeah, I like them both a lot too.
I mean, it was nice to have the contrast between the two.
Yep, they complement each other very nicely. I was maybe more moved by Onward Towards Our Noble Deaths, but I love Nonnonba. I just love the whole narrative. So yeah, they just, like I say, taken, they completely stand on their own.
Oh, yeah.
They're very different in many respects, but read together, they form a nice 2-volume autobiography of this cartoonist who, unfortunately, we'll be seeing more from.
Yeah, just when you think like, there's, the market with manga's like flooded. I mean, something like this comes along.
Yeah.
There's just a lot more out there that we have not seen
Yep.
from great creators.
Yep.
And hopefully we'll see more of them.
Yeah, for sure. So check them out.
Yep.
Shigeru Mizuki.
Yep. Thank you for tuning in this time around, and we will see you next time.